In a home full of loud voices, Aurora Brown had always been the silent specter. She learned to fit in, nod when someone spoke to her, and hide her emotions behind a composed grin as a result of growing up with her family's unconventional way of living. Every moment of her early years was documented on camera, but her actual thoughts were never. While her parents and siblings quarreled, giggled, and occasionally sobbed in public, Aurora's disobedience was quiet and kept to herself. She frequently questioned whether her family ever noticed her. She was viewed by her mother, Robin, as the daughter who needed protection, closeness, and protection from anything that could jeopardize the Brown family's reputation. In a sea of kids, she was just another duty to her father, Cody, who was trying desperately to maintain control over the empire. However, outside the boundaries of the Brown home, Aurora had found independence, which none of them could have predicted. Friendship was the innocent beginning. Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, TLC Flicks. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Someone very different from the intricate regulations of polygamy and the never-ending drama of sister wives, the boy she met through friends. He paid attention to her. She laughed at him. He referred to her as Aurora, just Aurora rather than as Robin's daughter or Cody's child. The late-night phone conversations dragged on and on. To avoid being heard, she would giggle softly while whispering into her pillow. During family get-togethers, she would sneak away and text beneath the table, her heart pounding at the sound of his response. She felt seen for the first time in her life. Friendship gradually evolved into something more. Love. She was afraid. She was ecstatic. Furthermore, it seemed perilously unattainable. Aurora was aware that her family would never approve. Her father would insist that she obey his laws, her mother would insist that she wait, and the other members of the family would condemn her for leaving their well-crafted environment. But there was no turning back now that Aurora had experienced freedom. Torn between duty and passion, she lay awake at night and stared at the ceiling. She still harbored a desire to win her mother over and preserve the shaky family Robin worked so hard to maintain. However, a stronger, louder part of her was yearning to escape and live a life free from contracts, cameras, and her father's wrath. And the decision became evident as the days went by. Aurora was no longer merely muttering disobedience in the shadows. She was prepared to experience it. Robin Brown has always taken great satisfaction in being a perceptive mother. She was able to determine when one of her kids was hiding anything, when their moods changed, or when they were having trouble with their schoolwork. Having raised children in the spotlight for years, she had developed keen instincts. So Robin noticed when Aurora started to drift away. It began modestly. With her phone clenched in her hands, Aurora stayed in her room longer than normal. She grinned more to herself, but her smile disappeared as Robin walked in. Aurora was more reserved and aloof during family meals, her eyes straying far away. Aurora's eyes glazed away as if she wasn't actually in the room when Cody babbled on about loyalty, unity, and their shared values. Robin initially dismissed it as the moodiness of adolescence. But as the weeks went by, the changes became more profound. Later in the evening, Aurora remained awake, talking into her phone after she believed that everyone had gone to sleep. She made flimsy, prepared explanations when she returned home late from outings. The worst part was that she had a glow about her that Robin was all too familiar with, the light of love. When Aurora crept through the front door one evening, Robin was waiting in the kitchen with her arms folded. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, her cheeks were flushed, and her hair was disheveled. "Where did you go?" Sharply, Robin inquired. Aurora's gaze darted to the stairs as she froze. "Just going out with some friends." Robin's voice became stern. "Aurora, don't tell me lies. Your mommy is me. I can tell when something is happening." Silence hovered over the room for a long time. Aurora's hands shook. She wanted to shut her door, bolt upstairs, and be gone. Robin's eyes, however, were sharp and demanding an explanation. Aurora let out a trembling breath at last. "I've met someone." The air was broken like glass by the words. Robin felt her heart sink to her gut. "Meted someone?" Her voice was low and menacing as she repeated. Aurora nodded, resolute but with tears in her eyes. "He's nice, Mom. Instead of treating me like a cast member of a reality show, he treats me like a human. He gives me a sense of freedom." Robin's voice raised in rage, but her tears came immediately. Free. Are you aware of the risks you are taking? This family has given up everything in order to remain together. You want to discard everything for a boy when we are always being judged and pressured? Despite her trembling chin, Aurora spoke steadily. Mom, this is my life. I can't continue to live by your rules. I adore him. Robin stumbled back as if she had been hit. It was betrayal to her, not just defiance. Robin had battled to keep their family together, but her daughter was choosing a stranger over her. Robin started crying uncontrollably. Aurora, you will destroy this family if you do this. Aurora didn't falter even if her voice cracked. Then perhaps it's time for it to collapse. The ensuing hush was deafening. Robin recognized, with a chilly aching in her chest, that she was losing her daughter when Aurora defied her mother for the first time in her life. In the Brown home, the news spread more quickly than wildfire. Although Robin hadn't intended to tell Cody right immediately, she eventually let it out of rage when the secret burned inside of her. Everyone realized by morning that Aurora was in love and wasn't requesting permission. Cody was furious. He thundered, pacing the living room like a lion in a cage. This is not happening under my roof. His voice was sharp, his cheeks heated. She is discarding everything that this family has to offer. She is making us look bad in front of everyone. Mary sat calmly with her arms folded tightly on the couch. Although she didn't say much, her shocked face was clear. A disobedient daughter? There was something she knew too well. In contrast, Janelle appeared conflicted, her brow wrinkled and her hands twitching in her lap as if she wanted to speak but was afraid of the reaction. With her hands gripping a tissue and her eyes swollen from sobbing, Robin sat aside from everyone else. She was unable to gaze at her daughter. With a tentative gait and a raised chin, Aurora entered the room. It was the first time she had ever felt both little and powerful. She was being watched by dozens of people who were passing judgment and waiting for her to break under the pressure of their criticism. However, she didn't. Cody gestured to her with a finger. Are you aware of the harm you are causing to this family? You want to make a show of yourself when we're already barely hanging on? Aurora, if you go through on this, you are not only betraying me but also your mother, your siblings, and the legacy of this entire family. Despite the tears welling up in her eyes, Aurora refused to give up. No one is being betrayed by me. For once, I'm selecting myself. I'm going with love. Mary covered her mouth and gasped softly. Oh my gosh, Janelle muttered, almost too softly to be heard. The atmosphere was shattered by Robin's sobs at that moment. Please, Aurora, avoid doing this. You'll be sorry. You will lose everything. With a shaky but firm voice, Aurora turned to face her mother. I only regret that I have been untrue to myself for so long. The ensuing hush was oppressive. Cody's face flushed with anger as he gazed at her in shock. Robin's sobs became more intense. Unsure of what to say, Janelle just shook her head as Mary gazed at the ground. Aurora then uttered the words that would reverberate throughout the family for all time. I'm marrying someone. Regardless of your opinion. The room blew up. Cody yelled. As though her heart had been torn from her chest, Robin let out a cry. She's gone, Mary muttered to herself. Shocked, Janelle put her hands to her face. In the midst of it all, Aurora stood trembling, her heart thumping like a battle drum. She was more than just the silent shadow for the first time in her life. The storm was her. Everything had altered after the family meeting. I'm getting married whether you approve or not, Aurora declared, and her words lingered in the air like unclean smoke. The Brown family was no longer unified after that day. Silent fights raged in each room as invisible lines were drawn. Cody's rage never let up. He kept pacing and screaming at anyone who would listen about how Aurora's disobedience endangered the family's reputation. Are you aware of what others will say? He growled, as if their reputation were more important than his daughter's happiness. Do you know how this makes us look? He asked. Robin withdrew within herself, letting her sorrows seethe in private sobs. Her voice would break if she mentioned Aurora. At times, she would not even mention her daughter's name, as though removing her would make the suffering go away. Robin saw this as desertion rather than merely defiance. Janelle and Mary found themselves in the center. Observing from the sidelines, Mary recognized a mirror of her own difficulties in Aurora. One evening, she murmured to Janelle in secret, "Perhaps she's just like me, perhaps she just wants out." Janelle sighed, as practical as ever. "But Mary, at what cost? Cody is as you know him. You understand Robin's feelings. What little remains could be destroyed by this." In the meantime, Aurora moved about her house in a new type of quiet. She was no longer the background hiding girl. She had voiced her mind, and now there was no going back. She was troubled by her father's scowls, her mother's tears, and her siblings' whispers, but she remained resolute despite everything. She started making plans behind her back. Late at night, she murmured to her fiancé about the ceremony they would design together while holding her phone to her chest. No cameras. No speeches that are pre-staged. Not a well-curated family photo. They would have this free, true, and easy. Her heart raced with happiness and sadness at the prospect of walking down the aisle. She pictured her mother sitting in the vacant chair. When the wedding was made public, she pictured the commotion her father would cause. She pictured the murmurs, the judgment, the headlines. None of it mattered, though. She had made her decision. Aurora had crossed the lines that the Browns had put in the sand without hesitation. She no longer lived for her parents' regulations, their reputation, or their brittle relationships. For the first time in her life, Aurora was living for herself. However, one question persisted in the background of her newfound independence, nagging at her like a whisper. Would the scars she was leaving behind be healed by love alone? It had finally here, the day Aurora had dreamed of since childhood, but it didn't look anything like she had expected. The veil shimmered slightly in the morning light as her bridal gown lay across the bed in gentle folds of white. As she pressed the final buttons on the gown, Aurora stood in front of the mirror, her hands shaking. Joy and sorrow mingled in the rhythm of her heart's thundering in her chest. It was where she had hoped to find her mother. She had imagined Robin adjusting her veil, muttering consoling words, perhaps even crying with pride. Now, though, as she gazed at her mirror, she could only feel the painful loss of the one person she had always relied on the most. Robin was rejected for good. Aurora had made a final plea to her mother the previous evening. She had whispered, "Please, Mum, please come," as she stood in the kitchen doorway, tears running down her cheeks. "I just want you there, even if you don't agree." Robin had a hollow voice and red, puffy eyes. "I can't, Aurora. I'm expressing my support for this if I go. And I don't." Aurora felt as though her heart was being twisted like a dagger. Knowing that her mother's seat would be empty when she said, "I do tomorrow," she nodded through her tears and left. As Aurora had intended, the ceremony was small, private, and camera-free. The rows were crowded with friends, their faces beaming with happiness. Some of her siblings, the ones who dared to ignore the stress at home, crept in to observe the event in private. And vacant chair, however, sat in the front row like a wound, a sobering reminder of what Aurora had left behind. She inhaled deeply and moved forward as the music started. With warm and devoted gaze, her fiancé stood at the altar. She was moving away from her previous existence, her previous cage, and her previous stillness with every stride she made in his direction. Her heart grew as she got to him. She wasn't referred to as Robin's daughter or Cody's child for the first time. She was just Aurora, a woman who made her own decisions about freedom, love, and herself. The vows were straightforward, unvarnished, and honest. Her voice broke as she responded, "I do," but her determination remained unwavering. Aurora felt the weight of her choice sink into her soul as her husband put the ring on her finger. While everyone in the room cheered, Aurora's tears fell silently down her cheeks. She wasn't crying because she wasn't sure about her decision. She was crying because it was the best moment of her life, and she wanted her mother could have witnessed it. However, the chair was still vacant. Thus, with the pain of a mother's rejection buried deep within her, Aurora sealed her new beginning with love by kissing her spouse. The Brown family was rocked by the news of Aurora's wedding. The rumors began among the attending siblings, then made their way to relatives before catching on social media like wildfire. The ceremony had already ended by the time it got to Cody and Robin. Aurora Brown, the family's daughter, had changed to Aurora, a married woman. Cody became furious at once. He slammed his fists on the table and yelled at producers as he ran through the living room. "You believe this to be amusement?" he shouted at the cameras. "You want to make a plot out of my daughter humiliating me and this family?" His voice was raspy with rage, and his cheeks was flushed. Cody saw Aurora's wedding not as a celebration of love, but rather as a chance to lose control and damage the family's reputation in the eyes of the world. Robin's response was much more devastating, albeit more subdued. With the curtains drawn and the outer world sinking into solitude, she isolated herself in her bedroom. She was on her bed with a picture of Aurora as a youngster in her hand, the image smeared with tears. Desperate prayers broke her whispers. Why her, God? What caused me to lose her? She kept repeating to herself, "I love him," what Aurora had said. "I can't continue to live by your rules." It was more than just rejection to Robin. Abandonment was the reason. With a pale face and a troubled heart, Mary observed from the sidelines. She understood the pain of severing familial ties, therefore she felt some sympathy for Robin. However, she also harbored a secret admiration for Aurora. In a private chat with Janelle, Mary acknowledged, "She did what I couldn't. She left." Ever the mediator, Janelle shook her head. But Mary considered the price. She lost her father, mother, and possibly all of them. Although freedom is lovely, it can also be isolating. The kids were split up in the meantime. Some sent Aurora a covert text message congratulating her, along with images of their smiles and tiny hearts of encouragement. Others remained silent about her, echoing their mother's grief and their father's rage. The echoes of it all were felt by Aurora, who was on her honeymoon. Her phone was buzzing all the time, with texts pouring with hatred and others full of love. She made an effort to concentrate on her husband's laughter, their shared sunsets, and the independence she had at last asserted. But she sobbed into her pillow at night when everything was still. She had lost the only family she had ever known, but she had gained love. At dinner tables back in the Brown home, stillness descended. When her name was spoken, the conversation ceased. Everyone understood deep down that Aurora's wedding had been more than just her act of rebellion. The crack has the potential to permanently break the Browns. There was a peculiar mix of grief and euphoria in the days following the wedding. Even though Aurora had married the man she loved, the lack of her family's acceptance still weighed heavily on her every morning like an unshakable shadow. The faint hum of freedom filled the calm of her new abode. Together with her spouse, she unpacked boxes, shared giggles over little household mistakes, and gradually adapted to a life that was exclusively theirs. Her personal decisions, which her family had never permitted, were mirrored in each room. But the memories of the past still plagued her in this new existence. She was reminded of what she had left behind by every message she disregarded and every social media post she skipped over. Although the supportive letters from her siblings were consoling, they also served as a reminder of the family she was no longer able to completely claim. Robin caused Aurora's heart to ache the most. She recalled her mother sobbing and whispering, "I can't support this," her voice breaking. Even if it was to be expected, that rejection was more painful than any resentment from Cody or rumors from her siblings. She had made the decision to choose love, but she had also made the decision to keep her distance from the woman who had once been her best friend. While everything was going on, there was a distinct void in the Brown family. Robin's loss hung over her days like a storm cloud. Cody's wrath subsided into a smoldering resentment, and the family tried to keep up the appearance of unity as tensions simmered under the surface. On social media, friends and followers conjectured ceaselessly, generating a clamor of criticism and rumors that the family was unable to completely answer or ignore. Aurora made an effort to immerse herself in the happiness of her new existence. She was reminded of what it was like to genuinely live for herself by her husband's little jokes, little escapades, and hidden smiles. But during quiet times, the consequences of her decision weighed heavily. Although she was free, there was a cost. She was standing on the balcony of their new house one evening while the sun was setting and gold was streaming over the sky. "I chose love," she muttered into the wind while holding her wedding ring. "Freedom was my choice. However, I still miss them." Even though Aurora had made a life for herself, the void left by her mother's absence served as a reminder that happiness alone cannot mend all scars. She was free because of love, but she had to pay the highest price she had ever paid for it. As the weeks stretched into months, the Brown family started to feel the aftershocks of Aurora's wedding as if they were waves in a stormy pond. Without her, the home felt heavier, smaller, and more empty. At family gatherings, Cody's rage had subsided into a seething discontent that came out in abrasive comments. Every room Robin entered was silently burdened by her unwavering anguish. Unsure of how to close the growing distance, Mary and Janelle kept a tight eye on things. They were aware that the family had been irreparably divided. Sometimes Mary muttered to Janelle, "I keep hoping she'll reach out," because she knew how lonely it was to follow her own path inside the familial system. Perhaps she will return at her own pace. Janelle shook her head, doubtful yet subtly optimistic that there might be a chance for reconciliation in the future. The outside world, however, was unrelenting. News sources presented Aurora's marriage as a scandal, and social media was a flurry of speculation and views. Stories about treachery, rebellion, and family conflict dominated the headlines. Every aspect of Aurora's life was examined, and even her happy moments were clouded by the awareness that what she had done had caused a commotion. In an attempt to protect themselves from the mayhem, Aurora and her spouse withdrew to their house and their quiet times. However, she was unable to disregard the messages, rumors, and remarks from both following and distant family members. Some were encouraging and congratulated her on her decision to choose independence and love. Some were unkind, doubting her commitment, morals, and even sanity. Tensions inside the Brown home increased even further. Robin's grief occasionally turned to rage. Mary and Janelle's nuanced attempts at diplomacy frequently ran afoul of Cody's attempts to keep things under control. The family appeared to live in two different realities, one in which Aurora was no longer there, and they were still united, and another in which her absence was a constant, agonizing emptiness. Aurora herself started to feel the consequences of her choices more acutely. Despite her newfound liberty and affection, she also understood that freedom came with loneliness. The fact that her family was absent from her life permeated every significant event, every peaceful evening, and every shared laugh. Fear prevented her from reaching out and making amends. She questioned whether her mother would ever pardon her. Aurora's resolve, however, remained unwavering. She had made this decision, and she would follow it to the end, even if it meant bearing the burden of rejection and public and family criticism. Aurora spoke to the night in the silence of her new house. "I chose this because I love him, but they will always be missed." Her decisions had far-reaching effects, and the visible and invisible repercussions were just starting to materialize. The Brown family was no longer able to conceal the wounds caused by the months after Aurora's wedding. On the outside, life went on as usual, but on the inside, tensions were building like a fire that might burst. Once exploding, Cody's rage had turned into a silent, icy resentment. Aurora's disobedience appeared to weigh heavily on every choice he made and every discussion he led. Robin's sorrow had also changed. Her tears had dried up and been replaced by a sour sadness. She carried on with her routine, but there was a noticeable sense of emptiness. Family get-togethers seemed lacking, as though an essential component of the home had been torn away. Her conscience was troubled by her rejection of Aurora, but pride and hurt prevented her from making amends. Where possible, Mary and Janelle attempted to mediate. They plotted discreetly, whispered behind closed doors, and occasionally found themselves silently questioning if Aurora's absence was a good or a bad thing. Those siblings who did not attend the wedding started to pick sides. Although no one dared to discuss it publicly, alliances were beginning to develop. Aurora's existence outside the family, however, kept expanding, albeit not without difficulties. Despite her husband's unwavering and consistent affection, she was unable to shake the stigma of her family's rejection. Holidays, milestones, and birthdays served as a stark reminder of the life she had left behind. Aurora was reminded that she was never really free from public observation, as social media continued to magnify the family turmoil by generating waves of rumors and discussion. Cody's private confrontation with Robin deepened the rifts within the Brown household. His voice was low and tight as he replied, "We've lost her. We were all meant to work together to safeguard this family. She's gone now, and we're to blame." Unshed tears burned in Robin's eyes. "I understand," she muttered. However, I cannot win her back by acting as though I approve of her actions. I'm at a loss on what to do." Aurora felt the weight of the distance more keenly than ever that night as she lay awake. Her love and her independence were lovely, genuine, and observable, yet they were separate things. She pondered whether time could mend the damage caused by the loss of her family. However, she reminded herself of her decision. She was unable to undo the line she had crossed. No matter how severe the injuries were or how long the pain lasted, she had to live with the repercussions of her life choice. The storm was far from ended, and the walls of the Brown household were crumbling. Both Aurora and the Brown family had been molded by years of rumors, conflict, and personal sorrow. Though it provided perspective, time did little to ease the grief. Though it was constantly tempered by the remembrance of the family she had left behind, Aurora had created a life full of love, laughter, and freedom. Her house was bright and cozy. Every day was full of little pleasures she had never before given herself, and her husband's laughter filled the rooms. They had developed rituals, gone on vacations together, and made their little private world their own. Aurora had at last achieved the independence and tranquility she had long sought. Even in her joy, though, she felt the pain of being gone. Birthdays went by without her mom's presence. Missing the warmth and chaos of the Brown home, the holidays were more subdued. Robin never responded to the occasional message, whether it was from a sister providing hesitant support or one that was cautious or disappointed. At family get-togethers, Aurora's heart felt achingly empty. The family found it difficult to settle again in the Brown residence. Cody harbored a silent bitterness that occasionally came out as stiff speech or icy gazes. Robin's anguish persisted, but it was no longer an overwhelming sadness. Although Mary and Janelle had mastered the delicate balance, the relationships of the family had been irrevocably changed. Aurora's disappearance served as a reminder that once rebellion is committed, it cannot be reversed. Aurora herself had come to terms with it. She understood that love and freedom had irreversible repercussions. She was also aware of the bravery required to live for oneself in the face of rejection from people closest to oneself. Aurora muttered, "I have everything I need here," as she put her hand in her husband's as she watched the sunset one evening. "I made a decision, and I stick to it every day." Her life was not flawless. The family she had known was never the same, and she had lost her mother's blessing. However, she had discovered what she had long sought: unconditional love, a house that was hers, and the unrestricted ability to be herself. And she discovered her strength in that decision. Aurora had survived the scrutiny of a family and a society that didn't comprehend her choice, crossed a boundary she would never be able to uncross, and suffered the heartache of rejection. She had, however, done so with bravery, conviction, and a resolute dedication to the life she desired. Aurora would keep creating her life in her own manner while the Browns would heal in their own way. The future, her future, was hers to mold, but the past could not be reversed. And it was free for the first time, really very free. It had been years since Aurora's wedding without her mother's presence. Both her life and the Browns had moved on, but the effects of that terrible decision were still felt. Aurora's house was now a haven. The kind of love she had always envisioned but never really experienced in her family home was present in her husband's stable, reassuring presence. Small pleasures abound in their lives. Quiet evenings spent reading together, morning coffee on the porch, and laughing that was only theirs. Although freedom had brought her calm, it also brought with it a constant sense of loss. Her siblings occasionally sent notes, cautious check-ins, hesitant invitations, or social media recollections. Aurora would grin, appreciative of their efforts, but she no longer anticipated an easy or quick reconciliation. Rebuilding some bridges may take years, and some may never fully recover. Although it never completely vanished, Robin's rejection had become softer with time. Even while she was cautious not to go too far, there were times when her affection for Aurora was evident through quiet looks, modest actions, and an implicit acceptance of her daughter's decisions. Ever arrogant but obstinate, Cody learned to control his temper and reluctantly acknowledge that Aurora had made a different decision. The entire family was different. Although the wounds from Aurora's rebellion were still evident, they also taught us valuable lessons. The members who remained together realized that love sometimes required letting go, and conversations became more cautious and boundaries were respected. Aurora herself had become more resilient, more sage, and more sympathetic. She started to understand that independence entailed accountability, not only for her personal life, but also for the connections she could either cultivate or let to deteriorate. She carried memories of the love she had lost and the family ties that distance had now molded, but she no longer felt remorse for the happiness she had claimed. Aurora stood in her garden one bright afternoon, feeling the warmth of the breeze on her skin. She grinned as she grasped her husband's hand, the burden of years of criticism, sorrow, and strife finally fading. "I've created a life that I adore," she muttered. "I made the decision to choose love, and I will continue to do so daily." Even though she still had some scars, Aurora realized that life was a sequence of decisions, some simple, some disastrous, and that she was responsible for choosing her own path through all of its challenges and victories. She had endured the storm of public and family scrutiny, been rejected, and defied expectations. Let us know in your comments. And stay tuned by subscribing our channel to get more updates like this. Thanks everyone.